Welcome back to Let's Talk Philippines. I appreciate everyone's feedback on the last video, and I'm going to be testing out something today, I think for the last time. Lots of exciting stories to come, so yeah, please give feedback on this one as well. Let's get into the story. I was sat on a beach in Thailand, thinking I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, moving there back in 2015. All the stories I heard about Thailand were like it was the Wild West. Beautiful girls and a culture that made you, as a foreigner, feel welcome and cherished. I'd arrived in Bangkok a few weeks prior to this, and from being scammed in the taxi as soon as I got out of the airport, to having touts outside of a tailor shop doing everything in their power to get me into their shop to buy a cheap suit, and a 45-minute wait to check into my hotel behind 4 other people waiting to check in, there seemed to be no sense of urgency in Thailand, and everyone seemed to be out to get as much from you as they could. I went out that night. Everything seemed to be way overpriced in comparison to what I was expecting, and that was back in 2015. I dread to think how far Bangkok has fallen ever since then. While Bangkok, on the surface, appeared to be a great city, I felt like it was two-faced. The main tourist areas were nothing like the more local parts of Bangkok. It felt like they were putting up a version of Thailand on a plate to people like me, fools from the West, and they were selling this dream in order to get as many people to Thailand as possible without caring about who they even were. When you understand that Thailand was no longer appealing and I left Bangkok down to Pattaya after only 2 days, that was my overall first impression of the country of Thailand. They were putting on some kind of facade in order to show that this was what Thailand is all about. Yet what Thailand is really about is hidden from tourists and expats. My time in Pattaya was no better. The bars were fun, but I went to Thailand with the understanding that this was part of Thai culture. The bar scene, the nightlife scene, that's what Thailand was about. But what I found out, it was only a very small part of Thailand, and it was hidden away in the tourist ghettos. When I left Pattaya to go on a trip around more local areas, the places were so different, and I felt like this was very disingenuous and nothing like I expected Thailand to be. I wanted Thailand to be like the versions of Thailand that I'd heard about, and all the thoughts that I had about Thailand when I read stories and listened to stories and spoke to people who would spend time in the country. Everything they described, I'd built a picture in my mind, and when I got there, it was nothing like that. I'd moved at 60 years old, straight to Thailand. I'd never been, but I was confident I was going to like it, but I didn't. I didn't think I needed to go for a look first. I spent 3 days in Pattaya, but I didn't like it there either. Let me rephrase that. I did like it, but it didn't feel real. It felt like it was designed for people like me, which in itself might not be a problem, but it made me feel like I wasn't really a welcome new immigrant to the country. I was a tolerated guest and I didn't like it. I went to Koh Samui to have a look. It was no different. And that's when I was sitting on that beach, thinking that this retirement that I'd been planning for over 10 years was not like I expected. What was I meant to do now? The country of Thailand seemed to be nothing like I was expecting it to be. The things that I went to Thailand for, as I'd already said, were only a tiny part of what was there in Thailand. I thought the whole country was meant to be like that. And you go and visit somewhere and it's not on the tourist map. Where are the bars? Where are the restaurants with food I actually want to eat? Where is anything I wanted? What I wanted was to be in a local area with the things I wanted, but it didn't mean that that's what I would get. Anytime I went to get something that I wanted, it was in a tourist area. Therefore, it was more expensive and to me completely unjustified. I'd already moved to Thailand, but I knew that I wouldn't last there. It was nothing short of a nightmare scenario that I found myself in. The Philippines was a country I'd heard of, I'd researched, but based on all the research, I ultimately chose Thailand and in the understanding it was far more suited to what I was looking for. But I thought I needed to do something about this. I can't take living here. So after spending only a few days on Samui, I went back to Bangkok and went to Manila in the Philippines as quickly as I could. I just hoped the Philippines would be more like I expected Thailand to be. Another thing I didn't quite get about Thailand were why were there so many family tourists there. I ran into a family from Germany. Why are you going to Thailand? You could go somewhere a lot closer and spend less money. Thailand is for single people, people who are looking for that affordable thrill that Europe doesn't offer. If you're going as a family, doesn't that completely defeat the object? Enough of my rant. I really do feel passionate about this because I felt Thailand was sold to me and I was actually promised the world, but Thailand was not able to deliver. Flying to the Philippines from Thailand, I was actually concerned that I was going to find the Philippines exactly like I found Thailand. I really hoped it would feel more like the part of the world was meant to feel, but I wasn't holding out much hope. After what I'd seen in Thailand, I felt like perhaps the illusion of the East was just that, an illusion. I landed in Manila, and the airport situation was similar to Thailand. Immigration took longer in the Philippines, and the airport looked slightly older, but the people looked just as friendly and just as welcoming. That's the first thing about Thailand. The people look so welcoming, but they're welcoming you as something different to themselves. They're not welcoming you as a new arrival to the country, they're seeing you as a guest, and I hope I wouldn't feel that way in the Philippines. When I was in Bangkok, I stayed on Sukhumvit Soy 11. That was where everyone said was the place to stay. In Manila, I wanted to stay in what I considered would be an equivalent place, and the same name, Makati, kept coming up. I stayed in a hotel there, and I wasn't scammed in the taxi on the way. There wasn't a big queue at the hotel when I checked in, and I checked in straight away, and there were no touts trying to get me into their tailor shops. Unfortunately, there were beggars on the street, but that was just one of those things you had to accept. I was feeling much happier in the Philippines, but I knew it was too early to decide if I actually liked it or not. I went out that evening to P. Burgos Street. Who hasn't heard about there? And the bars, in all honesty, weren't as good as the ones in Thailand. But the good thing that I did like about it, it felt like it could just be any other street in Manila. It didn't feel like it was set up on purpose as a place to round up all the tourists. It felt like an integral part of the city. I wished they had some beer bars there. Not all these ones where you had to walk through big doors to get in. But aside from that, I preferred what I was seeing in Manila compared to Bangkok. So far, so good. And maybe I needed to go to Thailand to understand that it wasn't this magical place that so many people said it was. I enjoyed my time in Manila. I spent 2 weeks exploring as much of the city as I could. The traffic, I would have to say, was worse than Bangkok. There was no public transport system like they had in Bangkok, and I found that Manila appeared to be quite fragmented. You had the big city of Manila, but there were certain parts of the city that you had to go and visit, and they weren't connected together in the way you'd expect them to be. But all in, Manila was fantastic, and I really did enjoy my time there. I hadn't moved to this part of the world to live in a big city, but before going to look at some of the islands, I planned first to go and look at Angeles City. Comparing it to Pattaya, it's smaller, there aren't any beer bars, it's dirtier, but it's like the Wild West, and that was what I was expecting to find in Thailand, but I didn't. The Philippines was better, and I could see this being a great little party town that I could go to every 2 or 3 months. I loved it there, not as a place to live, but I really liked it. From there, I had plans to go to Mindanao. The reason I wanted to go there was because I was speaking to a guy when I was in Manila, seeing how he thinks that the best part of the Philippines was there. There were some parts of it that were slightly dangerous, but he said he didn't have problems. He had a wife from there, they had a house there, and they travelled around the Philippines as often as they could. They were just in Manila for a week before they were going to Cebu. Then from there they would go back home to Mindanao. The way he sold Mindanao to me was like it was an up-and-coming part of the Philippines. There aren't as many expats there, and it's the kind of place that you could really get in at the ground up. So that's what intrigued me. It was my plan to work my way down there slowly, try and make it without flying and make a fun trip out of it, going throughout the Philippines. I'd already decided that I loved the Philippines and I didn't want to go back to Thailand. Now it was just seeing the country. As a new retiree, part of my budget was 6 months travelling before finding the place I wanted to settle down. The only difference was I was in the Philippines, not Thailand. Next I went to Cebu. That was when my plans changed again because I met a girl who I quickly wanted to spend more time with. Cebu is a great island, but instead of exploring it like I planned to do, I was actually spending time with the girl I'd met, which meant going out to restaurants and getting to know more about the city as opposed to the whole island. There was something about her that attracted me from the instant I met her. I'd been divorced at home and I missed companionship. There was no way I was going to have someone else from my home country because what they'd done to me, but someone from the Philippines. They seemed to be perfect, traditional, family-minded, and just the type of girl any guy would want. Things got serious with her on Cebu for the first 2 weeks I was there, and I asked her to join me on my round the Philippines trip. She'd have to give up her job in order to go with me, but she said she was paid such a small amount of money, so I could replace that. It always made me wonder how people like that are meant to save for any sort of future, but I didn't think too much of that, and she did agree to give up the job. I thought it would be a good way to get to know her, and also great to have a companion who was from there, so if I got into a sticky situation, she'd be able to help. She was called Ivy, 25 years old, but very mature for her age. She was everything I was looking for in a partner, and it was very fortuitous that I did meet up with her. I always felt that I was a very young 60. I could still get about, I was fit, I swam all the time, and I still had hair. I thought we were the perfect match. And we left Cebu, going first to Bohol, where I immediately fell in love with the beaches and the relaxed lifestyle that you could have there. Part of my desire to travel the Philippines wasn't only to travel the Philippines, it was also to find a place I wanted to settle down. Having Ivy with me made the whole experience 10 times better, and she had an elegance about her, and the way she spoke and carried herself, it made me feel like I'd found a diamond in the rough. We spent 2 weeks on Bohol in a really nice resort before getting on the ferry to Mindanao. I was shocked about how beautiful it was in Mindanao, but everything else fell short of my expectations. The guy who sold Mindanao told me it was a place I needed to go to. I think his opinions differed somewhat to mine, but we did spend a week looking around a few places. People were always warning that certain parts of Mindanao were dangerous, and that was fine, we just didn't need to go there. We made our way down to Davao and flew back to Manila. I wanted to see what Manila felt like when I had company, and it really did improve the experience of the city because there were a lack of beer bars, like you get in places like Pattaya and Bangkok. There really was no place to just go and hang out and chat to girls, so the fact that she was there was good. At this point, I'd already decided that I wanted to live permanently in the Philippines. I'd already come to the decision that I really wanted to spend more time with Ivy. I'd only known her for just over a month, so it was too soon to start talking about living together, but I did think, let's spend 3 months together, going to a few different places around the Philippines and really get to know each other. It was my hope to get married at some point and get the visa for being married. I felt like that would be the easiest way to stay in the Philippines and I could have a wife to spend my time with. I hated spending time by myself. When I was by myself, I'd always have to be drinking or drinking some more. I wasn't able to handle the loneliness and alcohol was a way to cope. I didn't want to ask her to get married yet. It was way too soon for that. But over the course of the next few months, we spent time in Manila, Angeles City, Bohol, Cebu, and Cebu was where she was from, and she had an inclination to prefer being in Cebu as opposed to other parts of the Philippines. I personally felt Cebu was a perfect city. Not too big, not too small, beautiful beaches dotted around the island, and it felt slightly different to Manila in a way that's quite hard to describe unless you've been. We were discussing things one day, coming close to the end of our trip, and we were in a resort in Cebu. I was liking being there, and I could tell that she liked to be there as well, and I said, what would you think about taking things further? I'm in the Philippines for good. Would you like to live together? And if things go well for a few months, we could get married? She liked that idea. I need to go back to the age gap. It was 35 years, but it didn't feel like that when we were together. I was very young for my age. I could have passed for 50, and she was mature for her age. I bet she could have passed for 35 in demeanour and behaviour, not in her looks. In her looks, she definitely looked 25. But it was perfect, the best of both worlds. I need to say that, is there are always those guys that say having such an age gap is doomed to failure. I didn't see it that way. I thought I would have great success as I thought I was everything she was looking for in her dream husband. Putting all that to one side, we spent a number of months together in a rented house in Cebu, and during that time she introduced me to her family, her mother and father, and I was saddened to see the abject poverty that they lived in. She also introduced me to her friends. They were all asking, do I have any friends who might want to get married to them? Although they were joking, it always was amusing to hear. After those 6 months came to an end, I felt like our relationship just went from strength to strength, and we did get married. To say that she changed when we got married would be the biggest understatement ever spoken in human history. Overnight, she went from being my dream girl and the person I always thought I would be with, to being a more assertive, demanding, and disingenuous individual. I picked up on it almost immediately, but the changes that happened were only subtle to start with, and it took me a while to fully understand what her game was, but it was as though she had already got the hook in, and it was a question of her playing with the line in such a way so as to not lose me, the fish at the end of it, while making sure she got what she wanted. The first thing that happened when we were married, she said, we're going to need our own place now. I had no intention whatsoever of building or buying a house in the Philippines. I was there to enjoy myself. But she started talking about, because I was a lot older, what would happen if something happened to me. I felt quite hurt when she said that. It was never my intention to have her as part of my will. Everything that I would have been left to my children from my previous relationship. But I did understand that she may want some kind of security for herself. And now that we were married, it was my responsibility to make her feel secure. This was the first little thing that she tried to get out of me. I didn't want her to get anything out of me, really. I just wanted her to be happy that she was being taken care of and spoiled with gifts. But that didn't happen to be enough for her now that we were married. The fact that that was more than enough for her when we weren't married just goes to show how vindictive some of these girls can be. But I learned that the hard way. Is it the same with all girls? They behave in a way they know we want them to behave, and they do it perfectly. They do it until they don't need to do it anymore, while they can still retain us. That's the thing that I hadn't understood up until this time. But it wasn't like she changed dramatically. She was just saying she wanted some security. So I thought, let's build a small house. Then she'll be quiet. When I say a small house, I really do only mean a small house. I'd seen houses that people had built for $20,000 and they looked okay, and it would be more than enough for us. She wanted to build in her village. She already had some land, but it wasn't much of anything. It didn't have any facilities close by, and that meant we needed to buy a piece of land. We found somewhere for only $6,000, and we built a house that actually cost $25,000, and I spent $5,000 on furniture. I hoped this would have been good enough, and she would now be quiet about things and just get on with being my wife, and for the first few months she did. The house was adequate. I was able to live there, but I didn't enjoy being there. I wanted to be somewhere where the action was. So we rented somewhere in Cebu and spent half our time in the house and half our time in Cebu. The next thing that we needed, according to her, was transportation. She said if we wanted to buy something and take it back, it was going to be difficult without a car. So then I'm looking at buying a car. Foolishly, I bought it for her. I only spent $10,000 on it, but she wanted me to buy something more expensive than that, but I got away with this one. I'd say we're probably at the end of 2016, somewhere close, and I'm enjoying my retirement. I'm in love with my wife, but I've built her a house and bought her a car, and I hope that's going to be the last of anything she asks from me ever again. I am giving her bits of money every month, but that's fine. Everyone needs food to eat, and that's what the money was for. When we had the house built and bought the car, I felt like she was changing in a negative way, only subtly. And I must stress that these changes so far haven't been drastic, but they've been big enough for me to notice them. But when we're in her village, she acts differently now that she has a house and a car than she used to do, as though she feels like her status in life has been improved and therefore people have to treat her in a different way than they used to treat her. I've never been a person like that. I treat everybody exactly the same regardless of how much money they have or where they come from, but she wanted special respect, and you would often see it. I'd be on the computer, watching TV, she'd be in the kitchen cooking something, and then someone from the village would come around and help her to cook, just to be in her presence. This, of course, was a really poor person from the village, and they were hoping to maybe get a meal out of it. So I didn't like the way she felt like she was better than other people after we had a house. And what I didn't get, it was only a very cheap house and only a second-hand car. I worried what would have happened if we built a mansion and bought a brand new Mercedes. I'm not enjoying my time in the house. I want to be in Cebu City. But I found now we're spending more time in the house than we are in the city, and it's getting very boring. Before, if I said, let's go to the city, she would be very agreeable and say, yes, fine, let me finish what I'm doing and we can go. But now it was nothing like that. It was, I don't feel like it, I don't want to, I want to stay here, I don't like the city, and all these excuses. And I felt like that was really disingenuous of her, because after all, I was the one paying for things and she was the one receiving money from me. Therefore, it was her job to be a bit more open-minded if I felt like it was time for a change of scenery. It got to the point where I was going to the city by myself and she would stay in the village. I'd have to leave the car for her to use, otherwise she would get upset saying, how am I going to go and do some shopping? When I would say something like, how did you manage for the first 20 odd years of your life? She would look at me with a blank stare. I always felt like that was the thing that was the beginning of the end of our relationship. She didn't seem grateful to have what she had now. She acted like it was normal that she had this, when if you looked around her village, nobody had anything apart from a shack to live in with holes in the roof. Her existence was better, but she didn't appreciate it, and I think that's what I was looking for, a huge sense of appreciation. Another year passes and we're probably not even spending half our time together, and when we do, she's not the person I married. And the fact that we did get married, although positive in the fact I got a good visa, if I wanted to get a divorce in the Philippines, that was hard, if not impossible. If I wanted to get married again, what was I going to do? I've met this perfect girl who changed as soon as we got married. But I persevere. I'm not giving up, and I suggest we go away together to a resort in Bohol to try and rekindle what we had. She agrees to go, but she's nothing like she was when we went there before. She's only 2 years older than she was that time, and she's just like a different person. Whereas I'm exactly the same, but it felt like exactly how I described it. She's already stuck her claws in, and she wasn't about to let go until she got out of me as much as she could. But the problem for her was I could see what she was doing, and I wasn't about to become another foreigner who lost all his money to a Filipina. When we were in Bohol at the resort, she didn't want to swim in the sea with me anymore like she used to do. She didn't even want to swim in the pool with me anymore. She wouldn't drink with me anymore like she used to. She would talk with me and smile a bit and do things like that, but all the things she used to do with me, which made me feel like I wanted to be with her, she was no longer doing. And you might think, well, people change. But the problem was, she was now in a lot better financial position than before we were married, a far better position. She now has a house and a car and some money from me, more than she could get when she worked at a job. Yet the more she gets, the worse she is, and I will use that word, the way she does her job as a wife. So I find myself swimming by myself in the sea. I went on a small fishing trip by myself and she just waited in the hotel, lying on the bed. We went out to eat together and of course, she's going to want to eat, but she wasn't prepared to do anything like she used to do. At this point, I'm starting to think I've been sold a lie. At this point, I'm about $40,000 into things. It's not a life-changing amount, but when we were in Bohol, I'd come to the realization that she wasn't the girl I thought she was. We were sat by the pool, having dinner in the resort, close to the end of our time there, and I spoke to her quite candidly, asking, why are you not the same as you used to be? What's wrong? What have I done wrong? Why aren't you the person I met? It's only been 2 years. I'm laying it all in on her, and as a guy, I sort of expect her to be apologetic, saying, I'll try harder next time. I understand your frustration. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. You know all the things you were expecting your girl to say. But deep down, we know that's not what she's going to say. She's going to turn it around and make it about me being the problem, not her. I bet you guess what the first thing she said to me was when I started asking these questions, and no, it's nothing like I was expecting. Why do you only give me 15,000 pesos a month? That was the first thing she said. Never mind, she was only earning 10,000 pesos a month at her full-time job when we met. I mentioned that to her, but she says, I'm your wife, I should get more. But I met you because of who you were and what was within my budget. Why do you think that because we're married all of a sudden you should get more? She didn't like that either, and I came to the realization that I would never make sense out of her because I was asking basic questions and she was answering them with questions herself. But while she was thinking she was in a position to be able to ask questions to me, I thought I might as well give up. Everything else that I owned, I'd kept back in my own country. She didn't know anything about anything to do with my finances. Didn't know anything about anything at all, so I wasn't concerned about that. But I did tell her point blank, you either be the person you were before, or we're through. And she said, fine. If you don't want to stay with me, you leave. When I said okay and I stood up from the table and started walking back in the direction of the hotel room, she quickly jumped off the seat and rushed back and grabbed hold of me and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I couldn't believe her behaviour. She was prepared to act like she was all high and mighty and she could do no wrong until she understood that the hook she had ripping into my flesh had shaken loose and she no longer had any control of me. Quickly, how she changed so considerably when she found that out. The only problem was that made it worse for her, and I suppose I am guilty of allowing her to feel like she made things work for the next few days. But when we got back to the house in Cebu, I just started packing my things and told her, you'll hear from my lawyer. She cried and cried and tried to get me to change her mind, and I did think long and hard about giving her another chance. I must admit to being too weak because I did give her another chance. All I wanted her to be was like she was when I met her. I didn't want anything extra on top of that. I didn't want anything apart from her to be the person she was during the first 6 months of our relationship. I made that perfectly clear to her and I said, I'm happy to give you another chance because I do love you. But if you're not able to do that, then I'm not able to stay. For the first month, I could see she was trying. But I could see it wasn't real. I could tell that she didn't really want to behave like this. But during the first 6 months of our relationship, she didn't seem like she didn't want to be doing it. Or perhaps I knew her long enough to know who she really was now, and during those first 6 months, I didn't know who she was, so her behaviour just seemed normal to me, even though perhaps it wasn't. She did try, but there were always little incidents happening of her going back to who she really was, and that's not how I was prepared to live in my retirement. I'm here to live my retirement the best way I can, and I do not need a nagging wife or someone there telling me what I can and cannot do, or behaving in a way that is unacceptable based on her position. I moved out 2 months later, and it was the best decision I ever made. I did lose $40,000 in the Philippines, house and car, and I guess another $10,000 I'd given to her over the course of our time together. It wasn't going to affect my retirement, but I did want companionship. The reason I wanted to share my story was because if you meet someone in the Philippines who you think is your dream girl, she might be playing the part of your dream girl. What you need to do and what you need to think about is how do you get her to continue playing the part of your dream girl for as long as you want to be with her. You want to get married to her and live with her forever? You want her to act like that dream girl that she's pretending to be all the time? That's what I wasn't able to work out when I got married to Ivy. But because she was so bad at being who she didn't want to be, I did know what to look out for on my next relationship. I did want to have another go to see if I could find a more real and genuine, down-to-earth person who was happy with who they were. I was just so cautious because how Ivy had acted from the time we met until the time we separated. But imagine that. Imagine being someone you're not. Imagine pretending to be someone's dream girl so that they will marry you and then change as soon as they do. That happens all the time in the Philippines. I guess it probably happens in many countries, and quite a few things that happened I'm not even able to mention. So I think you'll have to think about that in your own imagination. But one thing that she did do was worse than anything, but there was no place on YouTube for that. I was lucky that I did find another girl quite quickly, and I've been together with her ever since, and she is real. I must admit that I did build a house for her as well, and bought a car, but I'm still living there and she hasn't changed. She is who she says she is, and that's more valuable than anything else. It's taught me so many lessons, more than I think many people learn in a whole lifetime. But what it did do was also set me up for a successful relationship to a perfect Filipina. I'm grateful for the life I've been able to live now in the wonderful country of the Philippines, but it didn't start off great thanks to Ivy. Thanks for tuning in to today's Let's Talk Philippines story. Please give feedback on this format, and we've got some exciting stories to come. Thanks, everyone.